She wasn't supposed to be noticed, but a 10-year-old girl saw everything. The large analog clock above the glass doors of Lambert International Airport ticked on steadily, but for Margot Lane, time had stopped long ago. She sat in seat 7A of the VIP lounge, not just seated, but parked, like a carefully packaged parcel. Her champagne silk blouse was buttoned to the top, her beige slacks ironed to sharp lines, her dark hair pulled into a pristine knot at the base of her neck. Elegance wasn't a choice, it was an armor, and it was exhausting. Her wheelchair gleamed silently beneath her, polished and perfect. Even the chair seemed to understand the rules of this place. Don't draw attention. Don't ask for help. Don't let anyone see you struggling. To her left, the hush of luxury, soft piano music from hidden speakers, the clink of silver against crystal, the murmured tap of executive assistants replying to emails on their tablets. Everyone had somewhere to be, something important to do. And no one looked at her. Not out of cruelty, not even indifference. It was more like she had become furniture, a part of the setting, a static element in the set design of a place built for movement. Across the lounge, near the border where luxury met the public terminal, Caleb Turner knelt on one knee, tying the loose shoelace of his daughter's worn pink sneaker. His hands were rough, calloused from years of carpentry. His jeans were faded, and his sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He didn't fit into this world of chrome suitcases and silent discretion, and he didn't care. His 10-year-old daughter, Lena, leaned closer and whispered, "Daddy, why does that lady look so sad?" Caleb followed her gaze. The woman in the wheelchair didn't look broken. She looked like someone who had grown weary of pretending to be fine. Her hand trembled again as she reached for the porcelain coffee cup on the table in front of her. It clinked against the saucer, once. Then again. She gave up, resting her hand in her lap. No one noticed. No one offered help. Caleb did. He stood, brushing his palms on his jeans. "I'll be right back," he told Lena. He crossed the polished marble floor slowly, like a man who wasn't rushing to rescue, just a human seeing another human. Margot noticed his boots first, worn, real, before looking up and meeting his gaze. He didn't stare, didn't flinch, and most surprisingly, didn't look at the chair. He crouched beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Mind if I keep you company until your flight boards?" he asked, voice low, without pretension or pity. Margot blinked, unsure. No one had asked her for nothing in a long time. She gave a soft nod. He pulled up the empty chair beside her and sat down. They didn't speak. Not at first. They didn't need to. The silence that stretched between them wasn't awkward. It was generous. The kind of silence you don't rush to fill because it says something deeper than words ever could. Margot adjusted her hands in her lap. The tremor in her fingers had calmed slightly. For the first time in hours, she didn't feel like a painting hung on a wall. She took a sip of coffee, still trembling, still proud. She didn't know why this stranger was sitting with her, or why he wasn't asking about the jet, or who she was, or what had happened to her legs. He just sat. Across the lounge, the girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing on the back of a boarding pass with a crayon. "Your daughter?" Margot asked softly. Caleb nodded. "Lena, 10 years old, loves to draw, thinks vending machine sandwiches are gourmet cuisine." Margot's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'm Margot," she said after a pause. "Caleb Turner," he replied. He didn't glance at the wheelchair once. only at her. Margot looked away briefly. "People usually only talk to me when they need something," she murmured. "An update, a headline, a statement. You're the first person who's looked me in the eye today." Caleb didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, accepting her truth without softening it. "I saw your hands shake," he said. "Figured maybe you needed company." She looked back at him sharply. Not offended, just surprised. She wasn't used to being seen like that. Without pity, without agenda. "It's a nerve disorder," she said finally. "Ongoing recovery. Some days are better than others." "You don't owe me an explanation." Her eyes searched his face as if looking for the catch. But there wasn't one. Across the lounge, Lena stood up and began walking toward them, clutching something in her hand. Margot noticed and nudged Caleb with her elbow. "Your daughter's coming." He turned as Lena arrived, shyly holding out a small rectangle of paper. "I drew this," she said. "For you." Margot blinked down at it. It was a crayon drawing of 3 figures. Margot in her wheelchair, Caleb kneeling beside her, Lena standing in the middle, holding both their hands. Margot's breath caught in her throat. She covered her mouth, then slowly, with trembling fingers, she reached for the drawing and took it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Lena smiled. "You looked lonely. Now you're not." Margot looked at Caleb again. And just like that, something shifted. The polished, composed wall she'd spent years maintaining cracked at the edges. "I don't remember the last time someone made something just for me," she said softly. Lena climbed into Caleb's lap and rested her head on his shoulder. Margot kept staring at the drawing, then slowly placed it inside her bag like it was made of glass. The lounge around them continued on. Flights called, shoes clacked across marble. But something inside Margot had moved. Something that had been stuck, not physically but emotionally, had started to breathe. And she knew. It had nothing to do with the flight schedule. It had to do with the fact that someone, no, 2 people, had seen her. Not as a problem to be solved, but as a person worth sitting beside. The first thing she gave was a drawing. The second was a reason to stay. Margot Lane had never been drawn before. Not like this. Not in soft crayon lines on the back of a boarding pass, not with a child's pure eye that made no distinction between elegance and frailty, between seated and standing. Just 3 people holding hands beneath a sky scribbled with blue. A simple image. But it undid something she had kept locked away for years. She ran her fingers across the drawing, slowly, afraid the warmth of her skin might smudge it. Her breath came shallow, like she didn't trust it yet. That someone had seen her not as a body in a chair, not as a burden, not as the daughter of Arthur Lane, industrial magnate, but as someone human, held, whole. Across from her, Caleb sat quietly. He hadn't pulled out his phone. He hadn't even checked the time. His presence was still, not silent in an awkward way, but attentive, like he knew the air had changed and didn't want to disturb it. Lena had since slid down onto the polished lounge floor, cross-legged again, a fresh crayon in hand, already starting another drawing. Her backpack slumped behind her like a trusted companion, one bunny ear strap half unzipped. Her tongue poked slightly from her mouth in concentration. Margot glanced between father and daughter. It felt like watching sunlight moving across wood. Warm, imperfect, real. "She's remarkable," Margot murmured. Caleb looked toward Lena, then back at Margot. "She notices things before I do," he said. "People's silences. The weight in a room. She'll spot something off before I even think to ask." Margot gave a soft laugh under her breath. That's a gift, she said. Most adults do the opposite. We feel things last, if we let ourselves feel it all. Caleb leaned back slightly, arms folded. She's always been like that, even after her mom passed. The air shifted. Margot looked over. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He nodded. No theatrics, no deflection. It's been 4 years. Some days feel longer. Margot didn't press. She knew better than anyone what grief sounded like when it was being spoken through clenched teeth. Silence, when used well, was a language too. Outside, rain tapped the glass with more rhythm now, not heavy, but insistent. The kind of rain that makes people whisper without knowing why. Margot looked at her coffee again. It had gone cold, but she didn't care. Can I ask you something? She said. Caleb nodded. Why did you come over? He smiled faintly, not coy, not rehearsed. Because Lena asked me why you looked so alone, he said. And I looked up and saw you. And for a second, I saw myself. Margot held that. Not like a compliment, more like a mirror. I know what it's like to sit in a room full of people and feel like I'm dissolving, he added. Like if I left, no one would notice. Her voice dropped. And now you're the only one I can't stop seeing. It wasn't flirtation. It was truth, naked and disarming. Lena stood up again and padded back toward them, proudly holding her new sketch. You're in this one too, she told Caleb. She flipped the drawing to show both of them. It was a simple airport window scene, Caleb and Margot sitting side by side. But this time, something had changed. Margot wasn't in her wheelchair. She was standing. Margot's lips parted, not in correction, just awe. That's ambitious, she said with a trembling laugh. Lena shrugged, proud. It's how I see you. Margot closed her eyes for a moment. She had never asked to be seen that way, never dared to hope for it. But now that it had been offered, she couldn't unsee it. She held the drawing against her chest like a talisman. Do you want to move somewhere quieter? Caleb asked gently. Get some coffee? Margot opened her eyes, surprised. Then, after a long breath, she nodded. Yes, but not from here. He smiled. There's a vending machine down past the public terminal. It's awful. She grinned. Actually grinned. Perfect. They left the VIP lounge behind like it was a museum that no longer interested them. Caleb didn't touch her chair. He walked beside her. Lena skipped ahead, humming under her breath. The hallway that led to the vending machines was tiled in matte gray, humming with the fluorescent buzz of forgotten corners. Gone were the chandeliers, the designer bags, the silence money buys. But Margot was moving. Her arms weren't strong. The tremor came back halfway through the walk, but she didn't stop. Every inch she pushed forward was hers, not her nurse's, not her father's staff, hers. When they reached the vending area, Caleb stepped toward the machine and squinted at the faded labels. Espresso? He offered. As long as it's terrible, she said. He pushed the button. The machine whirred, buzzed, blinked red. Finally, 2 small paper cups dropped. He handed one to her. She took it with both hands, sipping carefully. Her nose wrinkled. Absolutely awful. He raised his own. But earned. They stood side by side against the wall. No rush, no destination. You know, Margot said slowly, I haven't moved myself in weeks. Caleb looked over. She continued. There's always someone doing it for me. helping me, pushing me, anticipating me. But I forgot what it felt like to decide where I go. She looked down at the cup in her lap, then up at him. Until today. Caleb didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Her truth was whole without commentary. Nearby, Lena sat on the ground again, sketching something new. Margot watched her for a moment, then said softly, "Would it be crazy if I didn't board the plane?" Caleb blinked, not in surprise, but in hope. "Maybe a little," he said. "But most of the best things in life start that way." She laughed, a full laugh this time, a laugh from her belly. Then her phone buzzed. The screen lit up. Dad. Priority line. Her smile faltered. Her thumb hovered over the answer button. Caleb watched her. "What are you afraid he'll say?" She stared at the screen. "Nothing," she whispered. "That's the problem. He won't ask. He'll just assume I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. On the jet. On time. On script. And if you didn't?" Margot looked up at him, and for the first time in years, someone looked back at her like she was allowed to choose her own ending. "I'd like to see where this coffee leads," she said quietly. Caleb raised his cup. "Then don't miss your chance." She silenced the call. Her hands were shaking, but not from the tremor, from courage. The jet was waiting, but for the first time she wasn't. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the rain fell in long, steady lines, silver streaks across glass, slicing the world into soft layers of gray and blur. It was the kind of rain that didn't demand attention, but changed everything anyway. Margot Lane sat at a small, forgotten table near the vending machines, sipping from a paper cup as if it were fine porcelain. Her fingers trembled slightly around the rim, but she didn't mind anymore. In fact, she welcomed the sensation, because for the first time in what felt like years, it was her hand choosing to stay. Across from her, Caleb leaned back against the wall, quiet, his own cup half empty. Lena sat on the floor between them, humming softly while drawing with serious concentration, her backpack now transformed into a pillow. None of them were watching the clock. None of them cared. And yet, across the airport, Margot's private jet still waited on the tarmac, engines humming low like a question with no answer. She had 15 minutes to board, but she hadn't moved an inch toward the gate. She couldn't. Not yet. Not while this, whatever this was still unfolding. "Do you think it's stupid?" she asked quietly, eyes never leaving the window. Caleb looked at her, not startled, just ready. "What?" "Staying here, drinking terrible coffee, missing a jet that cost more than most houses, letting silence feel like something sacred instead of something I'm supposed to fill with business calls." He tilted his head. "No," he said. "I think it might be the most sane thing you've done in a long time." She turned her face toward him, and for a moment her expression softened, softer than silk, softer than certainty. "You talk like someone who's been still before," she murmured. "Still and stuck aren't the same thing," he said. "I learned that the hard way." Margot nodded, sipping again. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but she didn't mind. Lena suddenly looked up from her drawing and crawled forward, placing the paper gently on the table between them. Margot leaned in. It was another sketch of the three of them. But this one was different. There was no airport window, no rain. They were outside, standing in a field of wildflowers, faces lifted toward the sky, laughing. Margot's hair was down. She was upright, holding a steaming mug of coffee. No wheelchair. Just 3 people. Together. Margot stared at the page. "You didn't draw the chair," she said softly. Lena shook her head. "Didn't need it." Margot's chest ached in the best way. She ran her thumb along the edge of the paper. "You know," she whispered, "when I was your age, I used to think that people in wheelchairs were either very sick or very sad. And I promised myself I'd never be either." Lena blinked up at her. "You're not," she said simply. Margot almost laughed, almost cried. Instead, she looked over at Caleb, who was watching her with that same calm steadiness. "What do you see when you look at me?" she asked suddenly. His answer was instant. "Someone trying to remember how to breathe." She closed her eyes. That's exactly what it feels like. Time shifted again, as it always does in airports, elastic, deceptive. In the distance, a soft chime rang out. The intercom voice was crisp, automated, female. "Final boarding call for Miss Margot Lane. Gate 4B. Your aircraft is ready." Margot's jaw tightened. That voice had followed her entire life. In limousines, on elevators, in boardrooms. Always calling her forward. Always telling her what came next. She looked down at her lap. Her phone was quiet. No new messages. No calls from her father. Not even from her assistant. She had been gone from the lounge for over an hour, and no one had come looking. No one had noticed. Her hand went instinctively to the folder still in her bag, the thick leather-bound one that dictated her every move. Press releases. Strategic alliances. Talking points. A map of someone else's version of her life. She didn't pull it out, she didn't have to. Instead, she said aloud, almost in wonder, "I think I'm invisible to the people who think they own me." Caleb didn't flinch. That's what happens when people are used to your silence. They assume your obedience. Margot looked up. "And what happens when you stop being silent?" He met her gaze, unblinking. "They lose control. But you get free." For a moment, the only sound was the rain, tapping like fingertips against the window. Then Lena stood up, slipped her drawing into Margot's tote bag without a word, and held out her hand. "Let's go somewhere," she said. "Anywhere." Margot looked at her, then at Caleb, then back at the drawing in her bag. A place with flowers, laughter, no chair, no script. Her voice was barely audible. "I don't know where I'd go." Caleb stood, slowly. "You don't have to know yet." Margot's eyes shimmered, and then, with no announcement, no fanfare, she placed her hands on the wheels of her chair and moved, on her own, away from the boarding gate, away from the expectations, towards something unnamed. Caleb followed her, not rushing, not leading, just beside her. Lena skipped ahead, her little boots making soft thuds on the tile. Margot stopped once by the trash bin and, without hesitating, dropped her boarding pass inside. It fluttered down like a leaf, and she smiled, not like someone who had given something up, but like someone who had just taken something back. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just drew a line and set herself free. The rain outside had thinned to a gentle mist, clinging to the airport windows like the last whispers of a storm. The hush that followed wasn't silence. It was a clearing, a breath, a space where something new could begin. Inside the public terminal, the world carried on in its usual chaotic rhythm. Rolling suitcases clacked against the floor. Boarding groups were called. A baby cried somewhere near a coffee kiosk. And in the quietest corner near Gate 2C, Margot Lane sat at a dull laminate table with her leather-bound folder on her lap. Heavy, perfectly creased, zippered with the precision of a life calculated to the minute. Caleb sat beside her, arms folded loosely. He didn't rush her. Lena had wandered a few feet away, squatting by the large window and sketching raindrops on the glass with her fingertip, singing to herself under her breath. Margot took a long breath, then unzipped the folder. Inside were pages of her life, written by others. A calendar color-coded down to the hour. Press quotes she hadn't spoken. Contracts she'd signed but never read. Strategic talking points. Event speeches she'd be expected to memorize and repeat on camera. Photo shoots already scheduled for next month. An itinerary with no white space. At the top of every page was her name. Margot Eleanor Lane. As if that meant something. As if ownership of the name implied ownership of the person. She turned page after page, her face unreadable, but her hands were steady now. "This is the part I usually can't bring myself to do," she murmured. Caleb didn't ask what she meant. She kept going. "I look at it. I get angry. I imagine walking away. But I don't." She finally stopped at a page titled Q3 Public Image Strategy, Lane Ventures. There was a headshot of her pasted in the corner. Perfect hair, perfect lighting. A caption underneath, "Still strong, still leading." Margot stared at the phrase for a long time. Then, slowly, she took a pen from her purse. Without pausing, she drew a single, long black line across the page. Not carefully, not timidly. The pen scraped. The ink bled. She flipped to the next page, drew another line, and another, and another. Every line not just a rejection, but a return. To herself. Caleb watched in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't tear the pages theatrically. She just crossed them out, one after the other, until the whole folder looked like it had been struck through by a storm of black ink. When she reached the final page, she stopped, and for a long moment, the pen hovered. Then she uncapped it again. At the very bottom of the page, beneath a list of media appearances, she wrote in cursive, "I was never theirs." She placed the pen down and exhaled so softly, so deeply. It was as if her lungs were breathing for the first time in years. Caleb reached out and gently closed the folder for her. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He didn't need to. His presence said it for him. A few minutes later, Lena returned with her hands cupped around something invisible. "It stopped raining," she announced. Margot glanced up at the window. She hadn't even noticed. "You know what that means?" Lena grinned. Margot shook her head. "It means it's time to go somewhere fun." Margot chuckled softly. "Is that so?" "Yep," Lena nodded matter-of-factly. "And fun doesn't start in an airport." Margot turned to Caleb. "Is she always this persuasive?" "Worse," he said with a smile. "She's usually right." Margot looked down at the folder again. Then she opened her tote bag and placed it inside, but not as something precious, as something finished, a chapter closed. She zipped the bag, stood still for a beat, then tapped the wheels of her chair once. "So where's this fun place you're thinking of, Miss Lena?" Lena grinned. "I don't know, but it has to have sunlight and something that smells like cinnamon." Margot raised an eyebrow. That's oddly specific. It's how I know it's a good place. Caleb leaned over slightly, nudging Margot's cup. You want to ditch the world for a bit? She looked at him. The question hung in the air like a dare, but also an invitation. Yes, she said quietly. I think I do. They left through the terminal's side exit. No security escorts, no chauffeurs, no handlers. Just 3 people quietly stepping out of the storm's edge. Caleb's pickup truck was parked in the economy lot, far from the polished valets and reserved hangars of the private lounge. The windshield was still damp with mist, the dashboard cluttered with coffee receipts and Lena's sticker collection. Margot looked at the passenger seat, then at her chair. It's not made for loading a wheelchair, she said softly. Then it's not made right, Caleb replied. He opened the door and began rearranging. He moved tools, folded blankets, adjusted the front seat so her chair could rest behind her. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't glamorous. But it worked. And when Margot was lifted gently into the passenger seat, with care, not pity, she smiled. For the first time, she didn't feel like a guest in someone else's plan. She felt welcome. They didn't drive far, just out of the airport perimeter, past a few gas stations, past a field of yellowing grass, past a roadside fruit stand with a hand-painted sign that read, cinnamon rolls, coffee, homegrown peaches. Lena squealed. That's it! Margot blinked. That's what? That's the place I was thinking of. Caleb pulled into the gravel lot. The place was barely bigger than a shipping container, with 2 red picnic tables out front and a faded white awning. But the scent, warm, spiced, and sweet, poured from its open windows like music. They sat at one of the picnic tables, paper plates in hand, hot rolls steaming in the misty air. Margot took a bite, then closed her eyes. Oh my God. Told you, Lena beamed. Caleb sipped his coffee and looked over. You good? Margot didn't answer right away. She just took another bite, then looked up at the overcast sky, where the rain had finally stopped for real, and for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel late for anything. It wasn't the call that shook her. It was the silence that followed. The cinnamon roll was warm in her hands, sticky sweet and clinging to her fingertips. Margot Lane sat at a red-painted picnic table off the side of a quiet country road, her lap covered with a napkin that had already lost the battle. Next to her, Lena was licking frosting from her thumb, face tilted to the sky like she was listening to something no one else could hear. Birds, breeze, the sound of tires on distant gravel. Life, but quieter. Across the table, Caleb sipped from a waxy paper cup of coffee that smelled faintly of over-roasted beans. It wasn't good, but it was perfect. Margot wasn't used to this kind of stillness, the kind that didn't ask for anything, that didn't demand a reply or check the time or keep score. She reached into her bag, almost out of instinct, and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up. Still no calls, no texts, no alerts, no, where are you? No, you're late. No, we need a statement, just nothing. Her thumb hovered over the screen like it didn't quite believe what it saw. She refreshed. Still nothing. She waited for the familiar wave of guilt, of panic, of reflex, the one that always came when she slipped even a minute off schedule. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt something stranger, unmissed. Margot stared at the screen. Her reflection stared back, her eyes slightly smudged, her hair no longer in its perfect twist, a bit of cinnamon sugar on her collarbone. Still nothing? Caleb asked gently. She shook her head, almost dazed. I thought someone would have called by now. My father, my assistant, anyone from the team. Caleb didn't answer. He just let the silence do the heavy lifting. Margot placed the phone face down on the table. You know what's worse than being needed all the time? She whispered, realizing no one's even looking when you disappear. Lena looked up from her roll, eyes wide but quiet. She said nothing, just reached out and touched Margot's wrist, sticky fingers and all. Margot looked down at the little hand, then up at Caleb. How do you do it? She asked. How do you handle being overlooked? He looked into the distance for a moment. The peach trees behind the stand were trembling in the wind, leaves flicking like 1,000 tiny hands waving goodbye. I used to fight it, he said. Try to prove I was more, louder, sharper, more useful. And now? He shrugged. Now I don't try to be seen. I just try to be real. Sometimes people notice, sometimes they don't. But either way, I'm not disappearing into somebody else's version of me. Margot closed her eyes. Those words landed hard. Because that was exactly what she'd been doing. Living in someone else's version of her life, a version that looked perfect from the outside, but inside was hollow and scripted. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She opened her eyes again. They'll notice eventually, she said, that I didn't board the plane, that I'm not in New York for the press launch. Maybe, Caleb replied, but maybe the real question isn't when they notice. It's whether you care. Margot didn't answer, not because she didn't have one, but because she didn't want to lie. The sun peeked briefly through a gap in the clouds, casting a soft gold onto the weathered table. It lit the edges of her face, her hands, the line of her collar. Lena picked up her crayon pouch again. Can I draw on your napkin? She asked. Margot blinked, then nodded. Lena placed it gently on the table and began sketching. A curved line, a square, 3 little circles. The outline of a house. A tree. A sun with too many rays. That's us, she said proudly, holding it up. Where are we? Margot asked, leaning in. At a house, a made-up one, but I'm going to build it someday. What's it called? Lena paused, thought. The Cinnamon House, she said, where nobody has to hurry, and you can draw forever. Margot let out a laugh that caught even herself by surprise. That sounds like exactly the kind of house I've never been allowed to live in. Well, Lena replied matter of fact, maybe now you can. They sat there until the sun fully peeked out, drying the mist from the backs of their necks. Margot leaned into the light, her face tilted just enough to catch it. Her phone buzzed once. She froze. It was a text. Her father's name. She didn't open it right away. Her heart thudded, not in fear, but in something older, deeper. The trained reflex of a woman who'd spent too long being watched, graded, measured. She turned the phone face up again and tapped the screen. Margot, hope everything went smoothly today. Send a photo for the PR post if you get a chance. We want to stay ahead of the rumor mill. That was it. No, where are you? No, are you safe? Just perform, deliver, smile. Margot stared at the message. Then quietly, with the steadiness of someone who had finally stopped expecting rescue, she deleted it. No reply. No explanation. Just gone. She looked at Caleb again. Her voice was soft. I always thought if I stopped playing the part, everything would fall apart. He didn't say anything right away. Then, maybe it will. She blinked. That's comforting. He smiled. But sometimes things need to fall apart before you find out what's real. Lena had climbed onto the bench now, her legs swinging, her latest drawing folded and tucked into her back pocket. Margot leaned back, placing her hands in her lap. The phone didn't buzz again. It was the quietest moment of her day, and the most powerful, because for the first time, she wasn't dreading the silence. She was choosing it, and it felt like the beginning of something loud. She had followed every plan, until now. Now there was no map, only a feeling. The highway curved gently through the countryside, winding past old barns and fields of wild sage that bowed with the wind. Caleb drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee. The silence inside the cab wasn't empty. It was wide. Margot sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, the sun catching in her eyelashes. Behind them, Lena slept with her head tilted awkwardly against her window, arms curled around her sketchbook. There was no plan, no destination, no one waiting. Margot had never felt more terrified or more alive. She shifted slightly in her seat, glancing at the dusty dashboard. A sticker near the radio read, "You are not lost. You are just somewhere new." She stared at it for a long time, then turned to Caleb. "Where are we going?" He shrugged without looking away from the road. "I figured we'd keep driving until something feels right." "Is that how you live?" "Sometimes," he said. "Other times I just go where Lena points." Margot smiled. "And what if nowhere feels right?" Caleb glanced at her, then back to the road. "Then you build your own right." They stopped for gas at a quiet little station with peeling paint and 2 lonely pumps. Margot waited in the car while Caleb filled the tank, his flannel shirt fluttering slightly in the breeze. She looked down at her hands. The tremor was there again, not from fear, from the weight of all the moments that had led here, this truck, this road, this stillness. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be in a Manhattan conference hall, standing next to her father, delivering a speech about adaptive innovation and legacy leadership. Instead, she was staring at a stray sunflower growing through the concrete next to a trash can, and she couldn't stop smiling. Caleb opened her door. "Want anything from inside?" "Surprise me," she said. He disappeared inside. Margot leaned her head back and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, Lena was awake, blinking slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Where are we?" "Somewhere new," Margot said. Lena grinned. "Good." They sat on the curb, eating peanut butter crackers and sipping chocolate milk from little cartons Caleb had picked up at the station. It felt absurd and perfect. Margot wiped her hands on a napkin. "You know what the worst part is?" she said. "What?" Caleb asked. "That I don't even know what I like. Not really. Not outside of what I've been trained to like." She looked at the carton in her hand. "I can tell you the carbon profile of every vineyard my family owns, but I couldn't tell you the last time I drank chocolate milk." She took another sip. "God, it's good." Caleb laughed. Lena offered her a gummy bear. "This one's red. That means it's the happiest." Margot took it solemnly. "I could use some happy." She chewed slowly. Let the sugar melt against her tongue. She didn't need a vineyard today. She just needed this. Later, they stopped again, this time at a wide overlook off the side of the road. The sky had turned the color of spilled apricots, streaked with pink and shadow. Trees whispered in the wind. Insects buzzed lazily. Margot didn't speak for a long time. She just stared at the horizon, her hands curled in her lap, feeling something inside her loosen. "I was raised to be indispensable," she said finally. Caleb looked over. She continued. "Everywhere I went, I had to matter. I had to represent something, prove something. I couldn't even show weakness unless it served the narrative of resilience." She shook her head. It wasn't just about being in the chair. It was about being the right kind of woman in the chair, graceful, controlled, never angry. She looked at him. Her eyes didn't waver. "But the truth is, I've been angry for years." Caleb didn't flinch. He waited. "Angry at my father for building a life I didn't choose. Angry at the press for turning my recovery into a PR campaign. Angry at myself for letting it happen." She exhaled. "I thought if I left, I'd feel lost." She paused, then smiled. "But now I think this might be the first time I've actually found myself." Lena, who'd been scribbling in the dirt with a stick, looked up and said, "You don't look angry anymore." Margot reached out and brushed the girl's hair from her forehead. "That's because I finally stopped pretending I wasn't." They camped that night in Caleb's truck. He pulled an extra blanket from the back, made a little pillow nest for Lena in the back seat. Margot reclined her chair and stared at the stars through the windshield. They were sharper out here, brighter. No city lights to blur them. Caleb leaned his seat back too, their shoulders a breath apart. "What happens tomorrow?" she whispered. "Whatever you want," he replied. "What if I don't know?" He turned slightly toward her. "Then we figure it out together." Margot let that settle. Let it warm. Then, just before she closed her eyes, she asked the smallest question of the day. "Can I stay? Just one more day?" Caleb didn't move, didn't smile. He just said, "Stay as long as it takes." She once lived in a mansion with a marble staircase, but the home she found was drawn in crayon. The next morning came slowly. Sunlight crept through the windshield of the truck like a secret, touching Margot Lane's cheeks before she was fully awake. Her eyes fluttered open, not to the sound of an alarm or a flight crew, but to the steady breathing of a sleeping child and the quiet rustle of wind through pine branches. She turned her head. Lena was still curled in the back seat, hair wild against the pillow, one hand gripping her sketchbook as if it held the sky. Caleb sat on the hood of the truck, drinking coffee from a battered thermos, his gaze soft and far away. Margot pushed herself upright in the seat. Her back ached slightly, but there was a calmness in her limbs she hadn't felt in years. Not freedom exactly, but peace. She opened the door. The air was crisp, slightly sweet. The field they'd parked beside glowed gold with dew, stretching wide like a promise. There was no hotel concierge, no limo waiting, just 3 people. 1 truck. A new day. Caleb turned when he heard her. "Sleep okay?" She nodded, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "Better than I have in years." He offered the thermos. She took it. The coffee was too strong and slightly burnt, but it tasted like choice. She sipped. "Where are we?" "Somewhere off Route 18, he said. "There used to be a campground here. Got closed during the pandemic. But the view stayed." Margot nodded slowly, as if listening to the land itself. She rolled her chair into the field a few feet, letting the wheels crunch over dry grass. The morning sun lit her face. Behind her, Lena stirred. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and blinked at the world. "We're still here?" she asked, voice raspy from sleep. "We are," Margot said, smiling. Lena reached for her backpack, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and without a word began drawing. Caleb and Margot watched as the child sketched with focused purpose. Her crayon lines were fast, confident. "She does this a lot," Caleb said quietly, "when she's trying to understand something." Margot glanced at him. "And what do you think she's trying to understand now?" He looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then, "You." Lena worked in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Then she looked up, held the page to her chest, and said, "I drew your house." Margot blinked. "My house?" Lena nodded. "Not the one you came from. The one you're going to." She walked over and handed the paper to her. Margot stared. It was a small cottage, bright yellow. A red door, wildflowers blooming around the base. 3 figures in the window, Margot, Caleb, and Lena, sitting at a table laughing. In crayon handwriting, Lena had written at the bottom, "Margot's real home." Margot stared at the paper so long her fingers went numb. "How did you—" Lena shrugged. "I don't know. I just saw it." Margot placed the drawing on her lap like it was glass. She looked over at Caleb, who was watching her quietly. "I used to live in a 4-story townhouse," she said. "Imported tile, an elevator. My bedroom had a fireplace no one ever used. I had staff, security, a garden with trimmed hedges so symmetrical they felt like prisons." She paused. "But no one ever drew it." Caleb didn't speak. She looked back at the drawing. "This one feels more like home than anything I've ever known." They spent the rest of the morning walking through the nearby field. Caleb carried a blanket under one arm, and Lena insisted on foraging, which meant collecting sticks, pebbles, and whatever wildflower petals the wind hadn't yet stolen. Margot followed behind in her chair, slow but steady. The ground was uneven, but she didn't ask for help. She didn't need to. They reached a small rise that overlooked the valley below. A few weathered logs had been set there long ago, maybe by a hunter, maybe by time. They sat. Lena stretched out on the blanket and began assembling her nature palace, arranging the objects she'd gathered with the solemn focus of an architect. Margot sat beside her, the sketch of her real house still resting in her lap. "You ever think about building again?" she asked Caleb. He looked up. "What do you mean?" "You're a carpenter," she said. "You build for other people. Do you ever think about building something for yourself?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah," he said slowly. "But I guess I never thought I had the right people to build it for." Margot's eyes met his. She didn't say it, but he heard it anyway. "You do now." That afternoon they stopped in a small town, just 2 intersecting streets, a bakery, and a gas station where the pumps still had flipped number counters. Lena begged to stop for lemonade. They found a little bench outside the bakery. Margot watched as Caleb and Lena walked inside. She sat alone for a few minutes, folding and unfolding the drawing. Then her phone buzzed. She hesitated. This time it wasn't her father. It was her assistant. A text. "They've noticed. Your father wants a call. He's furious. Do you want me to handle it?" Margot stared at the message. For once she didn't feel dread, just clarity. She typed 3 words, "Tell him no," and pressed send. Then she deleted the entire thread. When Caleb returned with 2 lemonades and a cookie the size of a plate, she was smiling. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," she said. "I just handed in my resignation." He blinked. "Seriously?" She nodded. "No press conference, no statement, just no." He handed her the lemonade. "To drawing new blueprints," he said. They clinked plastic cups, and Margot sipped. It was too tart, slightly warm, and completely hers. No headlines, no scandal, just one quiet morning where she never returned. Margot Lane didn't disappear. She simply didn't go back. No press release, no apology, no crisis to manage. The world she left behind continued spinning without her, too busy to pause. Her father's calendar was still full. The company's website still displayed her biography. The assistant still answered emails in her name. No one had even changed her out-of-office reply. But Margot was no longer in the building. She was here now. Sitting on the porch of a run-down rental cabin with flaking green paint, her bare feet resting on a sun-warmed railing. The cabin wasn't hers. Not yet. Caleb had found it through a friend of a friend. The owner said no one had lived in it for months. It smelled like dust and dry wood. But the view? The view was freedom. A slow river curled through a valley below, glinting silver in the afternoon light. The only sound was the wind chattering through wild grass and Lena's soft humming from the cabin floor, where she was coloring a row of tulips with a blue crayon. "Why blue?" Margot asked gently. Lena shrugged. "Because it's not what they're supposed to be." Margot smiled. That was enough. They had arrived the night before with a bag of groceries, a toolkit, and exactly 0 plans. The plumbing was slow. The roof leaked slightly near the edge of the kitchen. One cabinet door hung crooked on its hinge. Margot loved it immediately, because nothing was pretending to be perfect. She had spent so many years inside rooms that smelled like money, where everything gleamed and echoed, where warmth was staged like a scene and no one ever said what they meant. This place was honest. Caleb stepped outside with a steaming mug in each hand. He handed one to her and settled beside her on the porch swing. "Water heater survived the night," he said, taking a sip. "I knew she had grit," Margot replied with mock gravity. They both laughed. It felt like they'd known each other longer than they had. But it wasn't about time. It was about presence. They had been more real with each other in 3 days than Margot had been with most people in a lifetime. She turned her head toward him. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The old life?" He took a moment. "Sometimes I miss the certainty," he said, knowing what came next, having a reason to get up even if I didn't believe in it. Margot nodded slowly. "I don't miss the life," she said, "but I miss how it made me visible." Caleb looked over. She continued. "When you wear a name like mine, people don't ask if you belong. They just assume you do. But the second I stopped showing up," she paused, "it's like they just erased me." Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You weren't erased," he said. "You walked off the page." Margot blinked. A quiet gasp escaped her lips. "That's exactly what it felt like." Lena crawled over, holding up a new drawing. "I drew your cabin," she announced. "But better." Margot took the paper. The same porch. The same swing. But this time, the garden was blooming with impossible flowers. The roof had a weather vane shaped like a cat. And inside the window, Margot smiling, her hair loose, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, Caleb beside her, Lena between them. "It's our pretend future," Lena explained. Margot brushed a thumb over the paper. "It looks like home." Lena nodded. "It is." Later that afternoon, Margot opened her email for the first time in 2 days. The inbox was flooded. Subject: Need immediate approval. Subject: Clarification on interview. Quote: Subject: Board concern. Please advise. Subject: Silence no longer working. We need you. She didn't read them. She selected all and pressed delete. It didn't feel rebellious. It felt clean. She typed one final message. To her assistant, to the press team, to the board. Please consider this my final communication. I'm not disappearing. I'm just choosing to be found elsewhere. Margot. She clicked send, then closed the laptop. She looked around the small kitchen. It smelled faintly of oranges and old floor polish. The afternoon sun made the wood floors shine. A spider crawled across the windowsill with delicate purpose, and Margot Lane exhaled like a woman who had just taken off shoes that never fit. That night, they lit a fire behind the cabin. Nothing fancy, just some dry branches, a rusted metal ring in the grass, and the sound of crackling flames. Margot rolled her chair close to the fire and stared into it, watching the orange tendrils curl like ribbon. "I didn't know it could feel like this," she said quietly. "Like what?" Caleb asked. She turned toward him. "Like I'm still me, even when no one is watching." He didn't reply right away. Instead, he reached for a stick and handed it to her with a marshmallow on the tip. She laughed. "Are we really doing this?" "Lena says it's a sacred ritual." Lena, who had wrapped herself in a blanket and was humming a tune from a cartoon, nodded solemnly. Margot held the stick to the fire. Her hand was shaking again, but she didn't flinch. She let it shake, let it tremble. And when the marshmallow caught fire, she didn't panic. She blew on it slowly, calmly, then took a bite. "Burnt," she said, grinning. "Perfect," Caleb said. They ate marshmallows and listened to the wind and the trees. And when the fire died down, Margot stayed behind a few minutes longer, alone. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "I didn't go back." The trees didn't reply, but they didn't need to. They already knew. He came to retrieve her. What he found was someone he no longer recognized. The knock came just after noon. Not loud, not rushed, but sharp enough to cut through the stillness of the cabin like a snapped string. Margot Lane was sitting at the kitchen table, a jar of strawberry jam open in front of her, one hand curled around a half-made sandwich. Lena was humming as she peeled labels off a lemonade bottle. Caleb was out back, splitting wood, the steady rhythm of his axe rising and falling like a second heartbeat. The knock came again. 3 firm raps. Margot froze. Lena looked up. "Are we expecting someone?" the girl asked. Margot shook her head slowly. No, they were not. She rolled back from the table and made her way to the front door. The screen creaked as she opened it. And there, standing against a backdrop of tall pine and gravel dust, was Martin Ellison, her father's legal counsel. Sharp suit, pressed lines, dark sunglasses, holding a folder so slim it may as well have been a blade. Margot blinked. Her body tightened automatically, years of corporate reflex pressing down on her spine. "Martin," she said. He removed the sunglasses. "Margot." Silence. Behind her, Lena peeked through the window, wide-eyed. "I didn't know where else to send him," Martin said. "Your father was going to come himself." Margot's jaw tightened. "But he didn't." "No, he assumed you'd be back by now." She stepped out onto the porch, folding her arms across her chest. "He assumed wrong." Martin glanced at the cabin, then at the field, then back at her. "You've gone off the grid." "No," she said calmly. "I've finally gotten on it. Mine, not his." Martin stepped forward, holding out the folder. "He asked me to give you this." Margot didn't take it. "What is it?" "He says it's everything you need to undo this. Your resignation, the board seat, the press statement. He's giving you one chance to return before he goes public with a replacement." She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "What if I don't want to be replaced?" she asked softly. "What if I want to be forgotten?" Martin hesitated. For the first time in the 15 years she'd known him, he looked unsure of himself. "That's not the Margot I remember." "That's because I was never allowed to be her," she said, voice steady. "You all built me like an office building. Glass walls, polished surfaces, no room for weather." Martin looked down, then offered the folder again. "You should read it, at least." She reached for it, but instead of placing it on her lap, she tossed it on the porch swing beside her, unopened, untouched. Lena appeared behind her, holding her newest drawing. She held it out to Martin with the seriousness of a diplomat. "This is where she lives now," she said. Martin looked down. The drawing showed the cabin, the garden, a hammock strung between two trees. 3 people on the porch, one in a wheelchair, all smiling. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked at Margot. "Is this real?" Margot smiled faintly. "It's more real than anything you have in that folder." They sat on the porch for a while after that. Martin didn't say much, just watched Lena chase a butterfly barefoot through the grass. Eventually, Caleb came around from the side of the house, axe in one hand, wiping sweat from his brow. He froze when he saw the suited man sitting on the porch beside Margot. Margot nodded toward him. "This is Caleb." Martin extended a polite hand. Caleb shook it cautiously. "You with her old life or new?" Martin glanced at Margot, then at the untouched folder. Still deciding. Later, Margot opened the folder. She didn't read the documents. She didn't need to. She just stared at the first page. Press strategy. Reintegrating Margot Lane. As if she were a product, a malfunction, something broken being reintroduced. Caleb stood behind her, watching. "You okay?" he asked. She held up the page. "They wrote a strategy to make me disappear, then a new one to bring me back. But not once did anyone ask who I was underneath all that." She reached into the drawer, pulled out a match. Caleb said nothing. She struck it. The flame caught quickly. She lit the edge of the page and dropped it into a tin bucket by the door. They watched it curl and blacken. Then she dropped the rest of the folder on top. 1 page at a time. Gone. Ash. Gone. Ash. Until the smoke rose clean and light into the late afternoon air. That night, Martin stayed for dinner. They ate spaghetti from chipped bowls on the porch. Lena told him about her cinnamon house, about drawing dreams, about marshmallows and stars. At one point, Martin looked at Margot and said, "You seem taller." She laughed. "That's impossible." "No," he said, "it's not." When he left, he didn't take the ashes. He didn't make promises. He just said, "If anyone asks, what do you want me to say?" Margot looked at the stars, then back at him. "Tell them I'm not missing. I'm choosing." Martin nodded and drove off into the night. She left behind a legacy of headlines to become someone her younger self would finally recognize. 1 week after Martin left, no one else came. No board members, no assistants, no camera crews, not even her father. And Margot Lane was finally okay with that. She spent her mornings barefoot, wheeling slowly through the damp grass behind the cabin while Lena darted ahead with a stick, pretending to be a knight. Caleb would fix small things: the broken stair, the leaky faucet, the squeaky back door. And Margot would sit beside him, not directing, not watching, just being. It was strange how quickly a rhythm formed when no one was trying to control it. Coffee at sunrise, sketching after breakfast, quiet repair in the afternoons, stories by the fire at night. She didn't miss the schedule. She didn't miss the statements. She didn't miss the version of herself built to impress men in suits who never learned how to listen. She missed nothing. And that, too, took her by surprise. One morning, Margot found Lena sitting on the porch steps, holding a crumpled piece of paper. Her face was scrunched in frustration. "What's wrong?" Margot asked. Lena looked up. "I'm trying to draw your name." Margot blinked. "My name?" Lena nodded. "The real one, not the long one, just the one you're supposed to have here." She pointed to the cabin, the field, the sky. Margot rolled closer. "What do you mean, the name I'm supposed to have?" Lena handed her the crumpled page. On it were several trial names, each scribbled out. M.L. Margot Field, Miss Cinnamon. Margie? All crossed through. "None of them feel right," Lena said. "I think you have to choose it." Margot stared at the paper. She hadn't thought about it. Not really. She'd always been Margot Lane, daughter of Arthur, face of Lane Ventures, the woman in the chair at the head of the table. But now that table was gone. That city, that office, that name. None of it had followed her here. So who was she now? She looked down at her own hands, rougher than before. A few freckles across her wrists from hours in the sun, and a scar forming on her palm from when she slipped opening a jam jar. But more than that, her hands looked like they belonged to someone alive. She handed the paper back to Lena. "I think," she said slowly, "I want to keep my name." Lena tilted her head. "But I thought you wanted to change." Margot smiled. "I do. But the name isn't what I'm leaving behind. Just the story they wrapped around it." She paused. "I want to show them what Elaine really looks like when she chooses herself." That night, Margot stood on the porch. Not sat, but stood, using a cane Caleb had carved for her out of maple. Her legs still trembled. She could only stand for short stretches, but she stood. And Caleb, watching from the steps, didn't say a word. He knew it wasn't about strength. It was about ownership. Lena came out with her sketchbook newly opened to a blank page. "Draw now?" she asked. Margot nodded. "Draw it all." And so she did. The cabin, the field, the girl, the man, the woman standing tall with a cane in one hand and her name intact. No need to escape it anymore. It belonged to her now. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail, the first since they'd come to the cabin. It was handwritten. Thick cream envelope. No corporate logo. The return address simply read A Lane. Her father. Margot hesitated. She took the envelope to the back porch and sat alone. The river whispered below. She opened it. Margot, I don't understand what you've done. I'm not sure I ever will. But I looked through the folder you refused and realized not one page said what you wanted, just what we needed from you. That was never fair. I may not know who you are now, but I hope someday you'll let me meet her. Dad. Margot folded the letter slowly. Then she wrote back, Dear Dad, I'll let you meet her, but you'll have to come all the way here, and she won't wear heels. With love, Margot. She sealed it, placed it on the edge of the porch. Caleb would take it into town tomorrow. Then she wheeled herself back to the garden where Lena was planting marigolds in the dirt with a spoon because she said shovels were too impatient. Margot pressed her fingers into the soil beside Lena's. And for the first time, she didn't wonder if someone was watching. She didn't hope for recognition. She didn't long for applause. She just felt the earth and knew she was exactly where she needed to be. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be seen, not by the spotlight, but by someone who truly looks. And sometimes it's not the plane you catch, but the one you choose to miss that becomes the first step toward coming home to yourself. Margot didn't disappear. She simply chose to be found somewhere no one was looking. And in that quiet choice, she became more herself than ever before. If this story stirred something in you, even for a moment, leave a comment. And if you'd like to walk alongside more stories of healing, courage, and quiet strength, don't forget to hit subscribe. You never know which story might remind you of your own. See you in the next video.